How are you?
It could be better.
Yeah, same, right. I have paint samples in the back. I'm painting, so that's that's what that is.
It's very stylish, by the
Thank
way.
you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I resonate with so much of what you were saying, right? Like this pressure to feel like we need to keep showing up and it is important, but then also giving yourself the space to just say I can't today, right? Or I just need to grieve today, or I just need to take some space. I really appreciate you asking me if I still the opportunity
Mhm.
to say, no, I can't do this today, and normalize that we do need to take time and space because we are collectively grieving as a people.
Right. And that's not just lip service either. Like, I didn't want to just say that just to be cool or that's the right thing to say from black person to black person. Like,
Right.
there's something about being authentic with our moves right now where
Hmm.
it gave me pause because the reality is that like full out, like as much as it's cool to have this conversation, I really don't want to be here today either. You know what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yeah.
Like,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Like I want it to be like I'm giving you space and recognizing that this is how I feel. So if I'm feeling this,
Right.
there might be other people there that are feeling like this.
Yeah, and I think about myself in this situation a lot because I am self-employed. I have the freedom to regularly be like, I'm tapping out today and I've done that multiple over the last few months because I can, but I think about the people, black people
Mhm.
who have corporate jobs who don't have that space, right? That have to keep showing up and putting on their happy faces
Right.
in the midst of a lot of trauma and environments which people aren't really taking the time to acknowledge, right? How stressful, how traumatic,
Right.
how and so I
Mhm.
always hold space for people who have to keep showing up even when they don't feel like they want to.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Privilege.
Privilege, right? We all have privilege, and that's something too. We talk about privilege sometimes and often talk about in terms of white privilege, which obviously is a very real thing. But all of us have
Right.
privilege in some way, shape, or form, right?
Mhm. That's a
Yeah.
that's our entrepreneurial privilege to say I'm not
Right.
showing up today.
Not showing up today. I'm done. Not today. I can't do it. Yeah.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Everyone I'm sure knows who you are, but just to start off, you could just say your name and your business and what you're doing right now, and we'll go from there.
Sure. My name is Chrissy King. I am currently based in Brooklyn. I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Wisconsin, but I'm living in Brooklyn, New York right now. I am a writer, speaker, fitness coach. I'm not doing a whole lot of fitness coaching anymore these days, but still
Mhm.
dabble in it sometimes. And I write a lot about the intersections of racism and fitness. And I talk about body liberation as a core part of my business and my work as well. And then I do a lot of trainings and consultations around creating an anti-racist and diverse and inclusive wellness space. So that's what I'm kind of doing these days.
Just a few things.
Just a couple things,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Nice. The We're at a time and space where what you're doing gets a lot of airtime. And like Tasha Edwards was on a few weeks ago, and she's on a podcast release today, and she was saying like she's had this message for 15 years, for 20 years,
Yeah.
and it's only now that it's being heard.
Hmm.
What's your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
I 100% agree. I haven't been doing it for 15 years, but I've been talking about this stuff for 4 to 5 years now, and it has never gotten and what's really interesting is like none of my messaging has changed. It's literally always been saying the same thing.
Right.
But yeah, since June, I say essentially since like George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd is when all of a sudden, yes, more airtime than I've ever gotten before, more requests than I've ever gotten before, and it's kind of like it's a weird position to be in, right? Because I'm really excited
Hmm.
to be able to talk about this message with more people that are open and willing to listen now. But it's also a little disheartening that like something like that is what it took to get people's attention. Because the reality
Yes.
is what happened with George Floyd is nothing new or different than what's been happening for a very long time, right?
Right.
And so I always think about the unique time in history that really, why was it that situation that like all of a sudden woke people up? I don't know, it's
Hmm.
because of being in COVID and quarantine and all these things coming together, but it was nothing new or different. But it is definitely the most airtime and the most energy I've seen around people actually wanting to show up to the conversation within the wellness space,
Yes.
particularly. Yeah,
Definitely within the wellness space, because
yeah,
like I think back to like Rodney King, and then that was a situation that was significant, even though it happened many times before Rodney King. That was the
right,
first time it was recorded on
yeah,
someone's personal device, and that
right.
was a tipping point. And I feel like George Floyd was another tipping point in the same category.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I
Uh,
think, I think what's interesting for a lot of people, right, is that and like police brutality, right, is nothing new. I just think it's being recorded now in ways that hasn't been recorded before, and with the power of social media, those things are spread all over the internet in mass ways that haven't happened before. But
mhm.
the reality of like police brutality is like you just alluded to, it's been with us for a very, very long time. And so I'm curious to see what happens within the wellness and fitness industry over the next couple of years because you have probably witnessed this before. People's attention spans are short, right? And you can already see the difference from people's engagement earlier in the summer to now has already changed dramatically. So I'm hopeful that a lot of people who joined this conversation are really here to make meaningful change going forward, and that it wasn't something just to check off the box and keep moving, but that people really understand that creating change is a lifelong journey for us all, actually.
Mhm. Why do you feel like we have a voice in like we're fitness people? I mean,
Hmm.
that's one corner of who we are and what we do.
Yeah, yeah.
But isn't it fascinating how even though our gig is fitness, that we have such a voice on anti-racism?
Yeah. Well, because I think when I think about it anyways, why it's so important to be talking about anti-racism and social justice in general is because as fitness practitioners, right, I assume that most of us come to this space because we want to help people feel better in their bodies, to move better, to feel nourished, to energized, right, to just
Mhm.
have overall better health. But racism, right, has an impact on our physical health and our mental health. And so I think it's
Yes.
very short-sighted as health and wellness practitioners to think that we can only talk about the physical without understanding the implications for how our mental health and how actually racism, which has an impact on Black people, right, we
Mhm.
increases our chances of heart disease and high blood pressure and all these other things. And so those things are connected, right? We can't talk about one
So
without the
connected.
other when we're
Yeah.
talking about overall health and wellness. Yeah.
Right, exactly. I totally agree with that. But now, for the person who's just like, I just want to help this person get better on their bench press. Like, do I
Yeah, yeah,
have
yeah.
to engage? Do I have to dive that deep?
I mean, the reality is you don't have to do anything, right? Like, sure, you can just help people with their
Right.
bench press. But I think that if that's what you want to do, just be honest with people. I'm only interested in helping with your physical health. I'm not really interested in, because again, having a stronger bench press is really, really cool, right? And yes, it's really, strength is very, very empowering. But the reality is that like having a stronger bench press it only helps me. I mean, not only helps me, that's cool when I'm in the gym, but I have a whole life outside of the gym, right? And I have
Right.
all these things that are impacting me as a person
Mhm,
beyond the gym. So I think
mhm.
if you as a wellness practitioner is like, I'm only interested and helping people have a stronger bench press, then just I'm only interested in your physical health and
Yes.
nothing beyond that, and just be
Right.
really honest about it. But I
Mhm,
don't
mhm.
think any of us, and really this is a bigger conversation about white supremacy, right? And dismantling white
Yes.
supremacy. And all of us, no matter what our role is in this world, have an active part in dismantling this as a society. And
Mhm.
so just taking it out, I just think you're just like, I'm not really interested in really changing the systems at hand.
Yes, right,
Yeah.
exactly. And the flip side of it from a from a fitness professional perspective is like you can be sensitive to saying like I don't have the capacity to actually help you.
Right.
And in the same way that I may not know nutrition, I hand you off to a
Right.
nutritionist, or I'm not an osteopath, so I hand you off to an
Right.
osteopath. I need to have someone in my hip pocket, someone in my circle of health that I could refer you to that could actually help you on this situation. So
Absolutely.
for those of you who are watching out there, like in the same way that you have in your hip pocket your RMT and your Chiro, you need someone who can actually speak to this issue of anti-racism if that is something that you are really dedicated to but don't feel like you have the skill set for.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, right? Because I don't think the message is that, I'm so glad you said that the message is not that that I'm encouraging anyone to suddenly be the leader in this movement, right? Definitely not what I'm encouraging people to do at all. But
Mhm.
I do think it's important, like you said, to have someone that, can address these things, but more importantly, just to know, I think it's important that as wellness practitioners be willing to at least speak about the fact that racism and all of the and homophobia and transphobia, all the myriad of oppressions are real problems in people's lives. Not that you have to be the person coaching, training,
Yes.
and leading the movement, but that you're willing to acknowledge.
Mhm.
And I think what I've seen happen in the past, and I'm seeing this less now, but I've seen happen in the past, a lot of people just want to stay out of the conversation, right? Or they just want to be
Yes.
neutral about it. And for me,
Right.
that's where I have like a really big problem Like we
Hmm.
can't, staying out of the conversation is just a result of privilege, because if you have the ability to be like, this doesn't really bother me that much, I don't need to talk about it, that means you aren't personally probably being affected by it. And
Right.
that is privilege in action.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. I was speaking with my client just before coming on here, and she put it beautifully in saying that when we address anti-Black racism authentically, we are actually solving a bunch of other problems in our world at the same time.
Yeah, that is so, so true. And that's what I think is like so important for people to understand, is that anti-blackness, white supremacy, right? Although it hurts some people more than others, it really does hurt all of us, right? In a
Hmm.
myriad of ways that if we don't really stop and think about, we don't see. But when we address that issue, we are solving so many other problems as a society and as a whole, and all of us will be better for it.
Yes. So I have like real talk, practical application question for you right now.
Yeah, of course.
The phrase interrupting racism.
Yeah.
One, what does that mean? And two, can you give an example of how I would do that? Maybe in like a role play type situation or something?
Sure, sure. So
Okay.
interrupting racism for me, when I think about that, is really literally the word interrupting. When we see things occurring, how are we going to interrupt that situation in ways that feel still safe for us? I think it's always important to recognize, right? Are we
Hmm.
safe in this situation? And when I say safe, I mean like, am I going to be in physical harm? Not like safe in terms of like, do I feel comfortable, right? Because interrupting
Yes.
racism is never comfortable. At least not for me, right?
Hmm.
And calling people in, which calling in versus calling out, calling in is like we were having a one-on-one conversation with someone. I'm saying, hey, you just did this thing and it was
Hmm.
racist, maybe you don't understand that. That is never comfortable for people, at least not
Right.
for me. It's not. I had to have a situation where I had to call in a friend yesterday, that someone is really a friend, and it was very uncomfortable, right? It never feels good. But when I think of what interrupting racism means on a day-to-day basis, is like in the simplest of forms, is like when we are with family or friends and your uncle says that racist joke, right? Interrupting racism simply means that you're going to speak out and say, hey, Uncle Bobby, like you just said this thing, that's not okay, here's why.
Yeah.
And I think when I think about interrupting racism, and especially with social media nowadays, like I know a lot of people are sharing on social media, and I think are when we're talking to people that are really close to us, right? When it's our partner or it's our best friend or it's our coworker are saying these things.
Yes.
And I think we've all had situations where we're like, oh, someone said
Right.
something really racist and I froze in that moment. And interrupting racism means you don't freeze in that moment, that
Hmm.
you speak up and you use your voice to really interrupt that moment that's happening.
Right, exactly. So, and that's why I want to talk about this because I know, like, the same for me. Like, if you've rehearsed it in your head, if you have some words ready, if you think about a way that you could say something and it could be heard, it's a lot easier. Like, you almost have your hands on the trigger
Yeah.
already, and then you can do it in a loving way. Hey, can you imagine how this person would feel if they heard you say that?
Right.
Maybe next time you could say this or say, or why did you say that, or whatever it is. If we have our words ready, when those situations come, we are actually ready to use them.
Absolutely. And I think a big part of that also comes with just doing our own personal education. And I don't mean that we have to, like, spend all of our time reading about racism, but I do. There's a book, I actually have it right here because it's like my favorite book to refer to people, is this book, Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad.
Okay.
This is such a wonderful book. And what I love about it is it goes through so many. I think this is a great book for people who are trying to, because the thing is, we all have anti-blackness within us, even if we're black, right? I
Mhm.
recognize anti-black thoughts all the time, and I have to check
Yes.
myself.
Right.
I mean, this book is particularly written for white people, but it's a really good book to start to unlearn things in our lives. And what I really love about it is at the end of every chapter, there's like real reflection and journal questions that really get you to start thinking about some of these things in your life. And I think that
Okay.
when we start to do that work in our day-to-day lives, we are prepared to have those conversations, right? And we
Right.
are
Right.
prepared, and we can see more easily microaggressions that are occurring, things that we may have ignored before, and we can start to
Mhm.
see these things. And I really think that once you start to do this work and you start to see, you can't unsee it, right? You see it
Right. Right.
all the ways it shows up in your life all the time.
Right.
So that
Absolutely.
mental preparation and rehearsal, though, is really important because you're ready in that moment.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And the other side to that too is like I was saying in my intro, and maybe this is just me being selfish, but I like to speak when I'm going to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And what
Absolutely.
I mean by that is when we're challenging people with an anti-racism like action, how do we make it palatable? How do we make it digestible for the person who's going to hear it? Or do we not care and just be responsible for presenting the message and let them deal with it? Like, where do you land on how strong your message is or how subtle your message is when you're in situations?
Yeah, I was very very anti-tone policing of people, you know. So there are people who say their message very blunt and straightforward, and it might not be digestible for people because people like to receive messages in ways that make them feel good, but also that also is like that the idea that we are going to unlearn racism and it's going to feel comfortable is also a result of white supremacy, right? Because none of these conversations are really comfortable.
Yes.
And if you're sitting in a place of like, I want
No.
people to say things to me nicely, like that is part of the problem. So I think it's a very personal
Yes.
decision how you decide to say things. But I loved what you were saying about how you don't argue with people. And I think that is very, very important, particularly for Black people, right? That we spend our energy where it's necessary. And I'm the same way. Like, if people come to my social media and it's clear that they just want to argue, they're not here to have meaningful discussion, they're not trying to learn,
Mhm.
they're just digging their heels into their bigotry, I'm not going to continue
Yes.
talking to them, right?
Right.
It's a
Right.
waste of my time. However, on the flip side, I do
Mhm.
think that for white people, that is the responsibility to be talking to other white people, even when they're digging their heels in, right?
Yes.
Because ultimately, I do believe that while we are all capable and can help in dismantling white supremacy, it is because of power dynamics. White supremacy has to be changed by white people, and that is the response. They have to be leading the charge of ending white supremacy. So, in
Mhm.
that regard, I think that white people should be the ones taking on talking to the people who are really digging their heels in. And I think for
Yes.
BIPOC, we use our energy in ways that best serve us because we're also trying to survive and, you know, and take care of ourselves in so many other ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's, yeah, so well said. Um, One of the terms that I spent some time with, I've had other people on, and I think Kara's on here right now. KSA from
Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
and she is brilliant. And I loved having her on because I hadn't met her, and I've had a lot of Pilates people on here, and she's a personal trainer, so same movement world, but not someone that this audience would have seen. And she broke down. Oh, there she is. She broke
Yeah.
down implicit bias and terms like that so wonderfully. I love just for those who are here, can you just explain what an implicit bias is, and how that kind of plays out in our world?
Absolutely. So I love talking about implicit bias because, for one, all of us have it. So implicit bias is just simply unconscious bias that we hold, right? So biases that we all hold, no matter who we are, we all have biases. And usually we're not aware of them, right? That's why it's like implicit or also referred to as unconscious bias. The thing that's really insidious about implicit bias, though, is that even if you don't recognize that you have these biases, and you could be the most well-intentioned person in the world, those biases are absolutely um, translating into how you treat people, right? And the assumptions that you're
Absolutely.
making about people, the judgments that you're making about people, even if you have the best of intentions. And so that's why it is so important that we all be doing the work of unlearning our biases in our lives, because it's going to have an effect on how we think about the world, how we see the world, how we treat other people. And so actually one thing I always love to refer people to is Harvard has implicit bias tests. So you can just Google Harvard implicit bias test. And there's a
Yes.
myriad of implicit bias tests that you can take. And they're really great. I mean, ranging from things like, you know, race and gender to things like body size. There's just so many of
Yes.
them. And it's really great because I've taken a lot of them myself and you can't really trick the system. So
Yes.
it's a great test to take. But also I think when it comes to unlearning our biases, it's just a practice of those first thoughts that come into our mind, right? We all have those
Yes.
like judgmental thoughts, and so often we just let those thoughts go and just keep moving. And I think it's a practice of like, oh no, where did that come from? What is that
Right.
actually? Do I believe that? Is it true? Is that a belief that I want to hold? And holding ourselves accountable to really sit with those thoughts that pop up will help us to really start to see what our biases are and work to unlearn them. And the
Yeah.
practice of unlearning our biases, again, so like so much of what we believe and what we are taught is that we're a product of our environment, right? It could be the households we were raised in,
Of
the schools
course.
we went to, our neighborhoods.
Right.
And so unlearning those biases are important, and also it can be really jarring and disconcerting sometimes when you start to recognize what some of your biases are, and they can be uncomfortable to sit with. But when we're talking about doing the work of anti-racism, we're talking about doing the work of diversity, inclusivity in the wellness space, we absolutely have to be starting with ourselves and doing that work of unlearning our own personal biases.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, well, that's growth, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, if we're committed to our own growth,
Yes.
let's talk bench press, right? Like, I
Yeah,
mean, it's going to be
right.
uncomfortable and that weight's going to be heavy. But
Yeah.
if you do something that's just too light for you, you never actually affect change.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. And like, a really good friend of mine, her name is Sharon Eskandani. She's a life coach actually, but she wrote a post about this like a few months ago. And she was like, if we can understand the discomfort that comes with a yoga practice, right? Or running your first marathon or starting strength training, if we can understand the discomfort of that and we stick with that process because we see what's on the other side, it is the same thing with the work of anti-racism in our lives. Of course, it's going to be
Yes.
uncomfortable. All growth is uncomfortable, like, but that's where the liberation is. That's where the medicine is. It's in the other side of going through that discomfort.
Right. And if you take that to the fitness world, I have clients that some of them were, say, 40 years old when they went to their doctor and they said, you should really think about exercising. Never worked out, never played a sport in high school, whatever. So then their experience of exercise and its discomfort is different than my 50-year-old guy who was high school football player and now sits at a desk and has gained 60 pounds. When I ask him to dig deep or I ask him to do something uncomfortable, he gets it. He can reference being
Yes.
uncomfortable on the football field and
Hmm.
saying, okay, I just need to dig deep. This is going to suck, but I'll be better for it. But my 40-year-old person who's never worked out a day in her life is like, oh, this is too uncomfortable. I have to stop.
Right.
So there's a sense where me as the coach, I have to be sensitive to where this person is at and how I have to navigate them getting to the same place of discomfort, which may take 6 seconds for my former football guy. It may take 6 weeks for this lady to understand that this is uncomfort that I need to be able to see progress.
Absolutely. It's very, very true, right? And I think that is the same lens that we use with anti-racism work, and that again, we talked a little bit about white privilege, but depending on people's positionality, even within whiteness, right? There have probably been situations where they've never had to confront any of these thoughts before, right? Or never had to
Any,
confront
right.
any of these realities. And obviously, I'm not white, so I can't fully understand that, but I can only imagine how disconcerting that must be to start to recognize that maybe all the things that you thought were untrue, or that all the things that you have believed about how the world works, like even like this whole pull yourself up by the bootstraps mentality, right, is actually
Mm-hmm.
just not true. And so
Right.
that discomfort, and I said, it's so, I imagine it can be so disconcerting that you would rather just withdraw from the work, right? Because it starts
Mm-hmm.
to make you question everything you thought about yourself to be true.
Yes.
And so I totally understand and relate to that. And that's also why I think it's important when people are doing this work. And again, in this book, Being White Supremacy, Layla always encourages people to read this book in partnership with other white people
Mm.
or in groups, because then you can have those conversations, right,
The
about
shared
things that
experience.
the shared experience of what you're going through can be comforting in the midst of all your discomfort, to recognize that you are in this work with someone else, and then you can discuss freely how triggering this is for you personally. Because I
Yeah.
think the thing that also happens on social media a lot, which is true, I believe, is that the work of anti-racism can't become about white people's feelings, right? And like, it can't, the focus can't shift to being
Right.
like, we have to coddle people's feelings about this. However, those feelings are real, and those are
Mhm.
conversations that you absolutely should have in conversation with other people doing that work.
Absolutely. I love your work on anti-racism, but I saw your eyes light up when I said bench press. I know
Yeah.
you love movement too.
I do. I do. I love moving so much.
So how
Yeah.
how did you find fitness? Like how did it become your
Hmm.
profession as well?
So actually, I for like 10 years I worked in a corporate job, and during that period I wasn't someone that was like super active as a kid. I didn't play sports or anything like that. Like, yeah, I dabbled here and there, but I was really more of a like a book. I was always going to read and write. That's all I was doing, reading and writing. So
Yes.
I was just working in this office job. I was in a management position, and I literally just went to the gym for the same reason a lot of people do. I was like, I want to lose weight. And so that's why I joined the gym. And I
Mhm.
was largely just staying on the cardio equipment for a long time because I didn't really know anything about strength training. And I joined with my sister. And then she decided to hire a trainer. She's my baby sister, but I'm always doing what she does. So then I decided And I remember I told this trainer, I was like, listen, I just want to be skinny, make me skinny. And she's like, okay, cool. Let's go over here and use some
Mm.
dumbbells. I was like, what? I said skinny. I don't need to lift weights. And like,
Yeah, yeah.
I just had no understanding of the benefits of strength training whatsoever. And that first session was 30 minutes. It was literally felt like 3 hours. And I just remember talking about discomfort, right? I felt like I got
Yes,
hit by a bus for like 2 weeks.
right.
But I had paid for these sessions, so I kept going. And then by the end of like, I think I paid for like a 3 month block. And by the end of 3 months, like I didn't love it yet, but I was like, oh, this is kind of cool, right? And like I
Right.
could see improvements in just my ability, like strength wise, because also I
Hmm.
should say that growing up, I had this running joke in the family that I was the weakling. And
Hmm.
I was just like, all right, cool. Some people are weak, some people are strong. I'm just weak. No big deal. But through that process of working with this coach, I was like, oh, strength is a skill just like any other skill.
Mm.
And so, long story, she ended up transitioning to a small strength and conditioning gym that her boyfriend had started. And so she started training there. And I remember going in there and I saw him coaching women and they were like benching and squatting and deadlifting. And I'd never seen women doing that before.
Okay.
And so she didn't really do that. So I would just like watch for a long time. And I think he always saw me watching. And they ended up breaking up. So for a while, there and doing like boot style workouts with him. And then one day he was like, hey, I've been seeing you, eyeing this weight. So you should come work out. So he literally just on his own took me through and taught me like deadlifting, bench press, squat. And it was like love at first lift.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
just totally fell in love with it and started
Love
training for
at first lift.
powerlifting. It was love at first lift. And I started
Yeah.
powerlifting and ended up competing in powerlifting and got really, really strong. Like squatting over 300 pounds, bench pressing over 200, deadlifting over 400
Nice.
pounds, just things
Yeah.
I never thought I would do. And so it was really cool. And I love the gym. I love strength training. And I haven't been back to the gym since COVID.
Mhm.
So I'm really missing it right now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So if I drop the line, skinny is the new strong,
Uh-huh.
what does that mean to you?
I don't like it. No. It's really funny. I think I don't like any of those things. Like skinny
Yeah.
is the new this or strong is the new this. Again,
Yes.
I think it really puts people in boxes, right? Or even
Absolutely.
like skinny. Yeah, I just don't really like any of those phrases. And I think again, it puts unnecessary pressure on people to show up in the world in a certain way in
Mhm.
terms of our bodies, in terms of our strength, in terms of what we like to do. And I love movement, but I also love the autonomy to change and to do movement that feels good for you. And like heavy strength training one day might not feel good for me, and maybe I want to dabble with kettlebells, or maybe I want to dabble with Pilates. And so I just think giving ourselves the freedom to and the autonomy to do what feels good in our bodies and
Mhm.
to recognize that bodies are all different because they're supposed to be different. We were designed that way.
Yes.
That's what I love about, and that's what I love to encourage.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like throwing phrases like that out because like what you said is 100% true in terms of not boxing people in. But then I also respect the origin of it when someone is trying to redeem
Yes. Hmm.
something, right? So
Yeah.
so I like it for that as much as I don't like, well, let's not use this box. Let's put you in this box instead.
Right. Instead, we're doing this instead. This is the right box now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yes. What's your experience with Pilates?
I've only done Pilates like once or twice, honestly, and it was a very
Okay.
long time ago. But
Hmm.
what I do remember is that it was, and it was at a time when I was doing a lot of strength training, and I was like, oh, I'm really strong. This is gonna be fine. And I was shocked at how challenging it was.
Yes.
Shocked. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, and same coming from the personal training world, it's kicked my butt, and at one of those, there's one of those points where things hit you and you either feel defeated like I'm never going to do it again or
Yeah.
challenged like I'm going to own this and I'm going to be the best in the world at it because I'm not letting it kick my butt like this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I took that road, so that's where I'm at now.
Love to do it
Not the
again.
best in
So
the world,
I
but trying to own it.
Yeah. No, I would love to try it again. It's probably been like 8 years since I went for a few classes and it wasn't even that I didn't like it enough to keep going. I was strength training so heavily at that point and training for competing in powerlifting, which was like,
Yes.
2 hour, 2.5 hour sessions, 5 days a week. So I just didn't have the capacity for it at that time. But yeah, I would love
Right.
to try it again in the future.
Yeah, yeah. It's I know a
Yeah.
couple of New York people that are probably
Okay.
on
All
this that they're
right.
probably hands waving like, take me,
Well,
take me.
Sonia
Yeah,
was on earlier. That's my
yeah,
homegirl. So
yeah.
she will put me through a workout with no
Oh,
hesitation.
absolutely. She's
Yeah.
amazing.
She's
And
so great.
I just love what she's doing too in terms of like, the Black Girl Pilates and just like
Yes.
pulling a community together. So good on so many levels.
Yeah.
Just want to say hi to all these people here that are on this thread. It was just flying through. So just if anyone has any questions for Chrissy while we're here, please feel free to ask them. And I know you're not doing a lot of training right now, but I love to just always ask the question like, who is your ideal client?
Yeah.
Who would you make time for to work with and get them to a good space?
Yes, I still have like a handful of clients, and those are all
Mhm.
clients that have been with me for like, 2+ years. And they're like, please, we don't want to just, we want to keep working with you. I'm like, okay.
We'll go where
But
you go.
yeah,
Yeah.
please don't go.
Yeah.
But the majority of my clients I work with were women. Actually, all of the clients are women. And I think as my messaging has changed over the years, and I sorry about that, and I started dabbling in a lot more, not dabbling,
Yeah. No.
but I started getting into and talking a lot more about body liberation and
Mhm.
movement as joy, not necessarily as a means to only change our bodies. I started it like that's the majority of the type of clients that I attract. People who want to feel good in their body, who want to feel energized and nourished, but don't want to necessarily be hyper obsessed or focused on fat loss because they've been triggering for them in the past.
Mhm.
And people, a lot of women who just really want to be really strong and want to get strong in the gym, want to feel capable. And I think my story about having a past being like a weakling and then finding strength to
Mhm.
be so empowering and transformative. And I say it was a transformative, not just like in my physical body, but the lessons that I learned in strength training just really transformed into every area of my life. And I
Yeah.
recognized that, like those stories I was telling myself about not being strong weren't true. Like, what are the things have I been telling myself in other parts of my life that weren't true? And
Yes.
so I think that that messaging and that really attracts people who feel similarly or looking for that kind of empowering strength or to feel just really confident in their skin and confident in their abilities.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's a question from Tamara, I believe. What kind of repetitive strain injuries or pain have you experienced with heavy weight training?
To be honest, I was really, really fortunate that I never maintained any serious injuries. And I think that's working with coaches who when I was especially training for powerlifting and competing, I always worked with coaches who
Mhm.
did my programming. And I think that really comes from working with coaches who, you have a good relationship with one and are really good with the exercise physiology and understanding the body. I think in the
Yes.
powerlifting world, sometimes people really push beyond what they should. And they push through pain.
Hmm.
And I always was really cognizant to work with coaches who we were really communicative about how I was feeling, how my body was feeling, when my body needed to rest. And so I
Yes.
never really sustained any long-term injuries from strength training, which I feel really, like minor aches and pains that just
Yeah.
come with heavy training, but nothing ever really serious. And I think, again, that just comes with working with someone who really does a good job at what they do and knows strength training really well. And
Yes.
whatever discipline that is that you're trying to do.
Right, right, right. And maybe some
Yeah.
luck in there too.
And maybe some luck, right? There's definitely some luck because the one thing I will say is that I've gotten better now, but when I was younger, back in my younger days, I'm just joking. But when I first started powerlifting, I was
Yes.
really not great about like stretching and like
Hmm.
just warming my body up. I would just like jump into workouts, and so I've gotten much better about that. So it also is part of just taking good care of yourself as best you can.
Yeah, absolutely. When you were talking earlier about the personal training and how you kind of came into that, I was thinking about like, for myself, it was a little similar and I was working in social work and then I had some friends who were in personal training and they were like, you would love this field. Like you would really enjoy
Mm-hmm.
it. And from there, I took a weekend course and it was the fact that I had that mentoring of working with that person and them handing me one client and that turned to
Yeah.
five. And there's something to be said for that kind of growth in our field that it kind of gets lost these days because everyone wants to do just an online course or whatever it is, or even going to school for it, but losing that mentoring component.
Yeah,
So
that oh, so say that resonates with me a
yeah,
lot because the reason I became, and I didn't say this, but the reason I really first got certified is because the strength coach that I was working with, he was like, "Hey, you would be such a great trainer, right? Like you should think about this." And I was like, I don't know." And then I got certified and he really coached me and took me under his wing and the same thing, allowed me to train at his gym and really provided mentorship, invaluable experience that had I had not had that, I just really feel like my experience as a coach and a trainer would be really, really different. It's so important.
Yep. It wouldn't be as deep because you wouldn't have seen different people and seen, like the saying I always use is that a lot more things are caught than taught,
Yes, exactly.
right? So I could
Yeah.
read every book on from anatomy trains to whatever and just get it, but it's not till I'm working with that person. Watch out
Yeah.
then those tendencies and habits and things that you see within the human body that just get displayed when you're in that context.
100%. And then also, like, having the ability to work with someone who's been doing it for a long time, right? And see them in action and how they interact with the clients, right? And the things that they're
Mhm.
watching for, and just picking up
Yes,
on those cues is so invaluable.
absolutely, absolutely. Do you have that in your anti-racism work too? That someone who's been kind of guiding you in terms of building workshops, and is there anyone that is that person for you?
Not necessarily, but you brought up this. I would say no, not necessarily. However, I went to school for social welfare and justice, and I double majored in social welfare and justice and sociology. So I have kind of, and then I worked. We didn't even talk about what I did. I mean, I said I had another job, but
Mhm.
I worked for the federal government. I worked with
Okay.
homeless veterans for 5 years as a homeless
Okay.
coordinator, and then I got into a management role. And
Yes.
so I think this has kind of just always been something, as far back as I remember, that
Hmm.
it's always been really important to me. And it's always been things that I've been reading about and educating myself about over the years. So, yeah.
Hmm. That's fascinating. I'm sure someone's on here like, so did Martin. I actually did my master's degree and then was a housing coordinator for social work,
Oh,
or in
cool.
social development before I went to personal training, and then
Yeah.
hit that spot where it's like, well, I could either continue to build my PT business or fall back on my master's if I have to, and
Yes.
that was 2002. I've been doing it like ever since, right? So,
Amazing.
but you get that sense of having just a social consciousness
Mm-hmm.
that gets woven into what you do, right? So for
Right.
those who are watching out there, like that is always a challenge that I throw out there for people. How do you marry all of your passions in the work that you do?
Yeah, it's so true. I feel really fortunate actually, because I feel like social justice has always been something that's been really important to me. And then I got into fitness and I was like, wow, I love fitness. And so I feel really fortunate because now I feel like I've married like I feel like I'm doing all the things that I really, really love and I'm doing them in a way that I really enjoy and that I think is
Yes.
meaningful. And so I feel
Mhm.
really fortunate in that regard.
Yeah, absolutely. Without taking, I don't want to take away from what you're doing now, but what's next?
What's next? So actually, I've been really busy working on some super exciting projects. Number one, I'm working with ISSA, the Personal Training Certification Program, and I'm
Hmm.
writing a developing an anti-racism and diversity inclusion certification for them.
Oh, wow, good.
Yeah, so that's really exciting. It's a work in progress. It will be months and months and months before it comes to fruition.
Yes.
But very exciting. And I'm also working on a book right now about body liberation. So
Amazing.
those are the two big things I'm working on right now, but they are taking a lot of my time. But they're wonderful things. I'm both projects I'm really, really excited about.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your book in terms of what the theory and concept?
Yeah, so it's a book about body liberation and talking about a lot of things beyond just like, what does body liberation mean? How does that show up in our lives? But also talking about intersections of things that, again, we've kind of touched on, but intersections of white supremacy and how like the idea that we're supposed to show up in the world a certain way in terms of our physicality is so closely tied to white supremacy, right? And
Yes.
just really looking at all these different intersections of identity. So I'm very excited about that. Again, this is 2022 is probably when the book will be out, so we're a long way
Yeah.
coming. But I'm
But
working with a whole.
you heard it here first, though.
But you heard it here
Okay.
first, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
you heard it here first. And then also the other thing that I've been really busy with is just I've been doing a lot of trainings for companies around diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism.
Mhm.
So it's funny, not funny. It's interesting because this week I was just like I've been doing so many things I think are really important, but I haven't been doing as much of my writing, right? Like I'm a writer. I write for major magazine platforms, and so I'm like, oh yeah, I gotta also fit that in because
Got
that's
to do
really
that too.
important to me too. Yeah.
Right. Right. So, what do you do for your own self-care?
Well,
It's like the
I'm always
accountability question now, right?
yeah,
Like,
right. It's accountability question. So I'm actively working on getting better at my self care, and it's not. It's this, and I'm sure you can. understand this, you get into a space where you're like, oh, I'm doing all this work that I think is meaningful and it's important, and you just get like, you just go, 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 go. And
Yes.
so I'm trying to actively remember to take time to take care of myself. But daily practices for me around self-care always, I spend a lot of time in front of the computer, so it's always
Mhm.
I'm going out, just to move my body a little bit at least, but also just to free my mind. Still doing movement at home.
Yes.
I haven't been going to the gym, but I've been doing a lot of kettlebell and dumbbell work. So still doing that for self-care. And then also like I love reading a good fiction book. So I've been making more
Yeah.
time to read for a few minutes every day. And it's been good, but I'm getting better at the self-care piece. There's probably more that I should be doing.
Yeah, just looking up. Just about that whole self-care piece. That's the one piece I always want to throw back in the mix, right? Because like you said, like it's so easy to just stay in the ring, leaning in and just throwing punches. But our recovery, it's fitness, right? Like your
Yeah.
recovery is your training. Your work is only as good as your rest.
Absolutely, it's so important, and I think it's so important for all of us, because there is a lot of work to be done, but we want to be here for the long haul, able to do it. And so that means that we aren't burning out, right? That we're taking the
Yeah.
time to rest, to recoup, and then get back in the ring. So
Hmm.
important reminders. Self-care is and then self-care also for me, it's the small things, but it's also sometimes the bigger things like around your time and around your energy that sometimes
Yeah,
feel more challenging, but also really are important for us.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I love how Sonia says we are all activists. And there's different ways that that has expression, and you may be doing workshops in front of corporate America, and I may just be amplifying by promoting someone's workshop for the fitness space. So we all have ways that we can be activists.
Yes.
um, so I just want to throw that out there. I mean, I'm sure if you want to echo that, then feel free to as well, but like, do your part in the way that you can do your part.
It's so true. We all can be activists in our own way, right? It's going to look different for everybody, but we all have something that we can do. And again, I think that when you don't personally feel like you have that skill set to be the one on the front lines, perfect. Then, like you said, amplify the voices of people who are on the front lines. And then I think in the smaller way that we are all activists is that we all have people in our lives that we need to be having conversations with. And
Yes.
so, equipping ourselves with that knowledge to be able to have those conversations with people is something that
Mhm.
every single one of us should be doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That was a really fast 48 minutes.
Oh my gosh, I've been on for 48 minutes.
Yeah.
That flew by.
But I wanted to say this before like time runs out. I'm trying to squeeze this in with like 9 seconds left. I feel like our lives are running parallel in many ways, and not just you and I, but like people that are passionate about wellness and are passionate about anti-Black racism and passionate about body image and all these different things. So when I have an opportunity to speak with someone like yourself, I really truly do appreciate it. This is something that I've been trying to make happen for a while. Um, and I think it's just special what you're doing. I just want to say like, thank you so much for being a voice that I can point people to and say, look at what she's doing, and cheer for her. So I just want to, I'm really cheering for you and everything you do.
Oh, thank you so much. I really, really, really appreciate that. And thank you for having me on and for being patient with me because this did take a long time to schedule. So you were
Yes.
persistent. Thank you. I appreciate that. Not because I didn't want to, but just again, things all over the place. So I appreciate that. And thank you for the kind words. And I can't believe you've been on. This has been like such a great conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it.